This podcast contains paid advertisements, but more on that later. Welcome to the O'Connor Bootstrap Podcast, where I discuss how you can grow your business by the bootstraps. This applies to all entrepreneurs, from the person just starting up to the one that is already well established. My goal is to help you grow. I am your host, Isaiah O'Connor. Okay, so today I'm not going to go with an actual sponsor, but I'm going to tell you about my new paid-for subscription service. The subscription service is over at buymeacoffee.com/bootstrap. And there you can sign up for $5 a month or $50 a year. You will get emails when I post member-only posts. You'll get access to our member-only Facebook page. You'll get access to any blog post I write before I go live. You'll get access to podcast transcripts as they become available. You'll also, if you have a business website, get a free analysis and breakdown of the website, effectiveness, etc. And you will also get 10% off of all connected services on buymeacoffee.com. So do check it out. It'd be really cool. You'll get to know me. I'm looking at building up a group of entrepreneurs that will be helping each other out on the private Facebook page. And I'll be adding other goodies as I can come up with them. I'm also open to ideas of what you would like with that membership. If you send me a message, email me, etc., then I will look into it. So today we're going to be talking about statistics. Now, it has been said, I looked and can't figure out who said it first, but it was made popular by Mark Twain, who said there are 3 types of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. Now, it is kind of funny, but it's also kind of true. Now, when it comes to statistics, statistics in and of themselves don't lie. You can look at data, and the data there is there, and it's just data. The data doesn't lie. However, the interpretation of the data can be, misleading at best if you don't know what you're doing. Well, if you don't know what you're doing, you can misinterpret the data. It's easy to misinterpret. If you know what you're doing, you can mislead people with the data. And you can twist them and use them and say absolutely truth about what the data says, but then twist the data so that it says something else. Now, why is this important when you're in business? Well, first and foremost, you need good data to run your company. It's helpful to know what the statistics are about your numbers, about how many sales you make. That's the raw data. You can look at it and see how things are going. So yeah, you do need to have good data sets to go off of. The issue comes in how you interpret said data. When you look at the data, you got to be careful that if you're looking at a set of statistics, that you dig down deep to see what they might mean, what else they could mean, or what could explain the data points. It can be very important, and it can make or break your business. Also, when it comes to marketing, a lot of people like to market their product using statistics, which again can also be misleading, depending on how you use it. And lastly, statistics can be used against you and or your business to try to shut you down. I've seen it happen. And that's where it is also good to be able to detect people using statistics to lie, to defend yourself from attack. So let's talk about the most important, the easiest part to do, and that's interpreting data. there was a great little story I heard from Lindy Beige. I've talked about him before and how he did that really hilarious commercial for the Dollar Shave Club, and he never shaves. It was really funny. Great commercial. You can go check that out. But on Lindy Beige, he talked about how he had some problems with helmets during World War One and how they resolved it. So let me go into that story then. Now the story goes something like this, that when World War One started, they initially did not bother to give the troops steel helmets because a steel helmet, they couldn't make a steel helmet strong enough to stop a rifle round. Rifle rounds were too fast, moved too quickly, and hit too hard for a helmet to stop. Even today, helmets can't really stop a rifle round directed right at the helmet. Matter of fact, I heard of a guy in Vietnam who took a bullet to a helmet. Fortunately, it missed his head, but it peeled his steel helmet open right down the middle like a wave peeled back on either side. So, steel helmets don't stop bullets. So they figured, why bother? They're heavy, the troops can overheat, they're more expensive to make than just a cloth hat or a bush hat of some sort, something with a brim to keep the sun out of your eyes. They seem to be better, so why have helmets? Problem was, without helmets, they had a very high percentage of people dying from head injuries. I can't remember what the exact numbers were, but it was a very high percent of people dying from head injuries. So they tried it out. They did a test run. They issued helmets to a group of soldiers, and they wanted to see how it ran, and they let them use them for a month or so. Then they collected the casualty data, brought it back, and ran the numbers. Well, the numbers came back, and one of the officers saw the numbers and was not happy at all, because when he looked at the numbers, all of a sudden, head injuries skyrocketed. All of a sudden, there was way more head injuries than ever before in the entire history of the war. The most head injuries ever. So he went to the general and said, "General, we have to stop issuing helmets and recall any and all helmets that they have out there right now, because the soldiers using these helmets are getting injured in the head, and that's not good. We can't have all these soldiers getting head injuries. It's bad." Fortunately, the general was a little bit wiser than the lieutenant, who was a little bit panicky, and said, "You're looking at the data wrong, because those head injuries would have been deaths, because they're getting hit in the head from shrapnel, which is now injuring them instead of killing them. Because shrapnel is stopped by helmets, or at least slowed down so it doesn't kill you immediately." So the general looked and said, "We're going to issue helmets to everyone because they're saving lives." So yeah, increased head injuries, but that meant they survived being hit in the head, whereas before they were dying. It is kind of a funny story, and I'm not sure how authentic or true it is, but it makes sense. People look at statistics and they try to explain, and if they don't quite think through them, you can take it and you can run the wrong direction with that data, with that statistic, and feel bad about it. So yeah, that's one part where you have to understand. Another problem with statistics is something called the Simpsons paradox. No, it has nothing to do with Bart, Lisa, and Homer. It's some scientist guy named Simpson, of course. Now, it's easiest if I just read the definition of it from Wikipedia. Simpson's paradox, which goes by several names, is a phenomenon in probability and statistics in which a trend appears in several different groups of data, but disappears or reverses when these groups are combined. This result is often encountered in social science and medical science statistics, and is particularly problematic when frequency data is unduly given causal interpretations, yada yada. Anyway, this is, again, one of those where you need to go, and I'm going to just give you a brief explanation on this, and if you're interested, it's worth going into a deep dive onto the subject. I do like to throw out tidbits of information that you should go further research. But for an example, they were looking at the UC Berkeley college admissions, and when they looked at the groups of men and women applying, it showed, when you combine the two totals, that 44% of men were admitted out of the applicants, and only 35 women were admitted out of the applicants. Now, this seems to be a gender bias against women when applying for Berkeley, which is shocking and bad and scary and oh my. That is until you get more data or you break up the data into the original data groups. As it turned out, that when you looked at the different departments, then in the different departments, it was a different story. It appears that 6 of the 85 departments were significantly biased against men, whereas 4 were significantly biased against women. So basically, when you gather up the information, you find that the women were applying more for the departments that were really hard to get into and had a higher rejection rate than the men. The men were applying more for the departments that were very open and very easy to get into. In other words, the men usually applied for the easy degrees, and the women applied for the harder degrees, and since the harder degrees had higher standards, it was harder to get in. Therefore, less women made it in than men because of the degree choice, and it had nothing to do with bias against any gender. And that can be one of the problems with statistics. You can look at a total set of data that looks one way, but when you break it down a bit, it looks totally different. So when you're looking at statistics for your business and you're looking at your numbers, try to figure out what these numbers really mean. To give you an idea, in 2019, I had a huge sales drop. I had a 50% loss in revenue for that year. And it was really rough. It was hard. Now, I'm sure you're saying, why am I listening to a guy talk about business who had a 51% loss in revenue? Now, I've gone over this in other podcasts before, but let's take a look at it. What happened? Well, 40% of that loss was due to my biggest client stopping ordering any extra services at all because they lost a lot of money themselves. So my biggest client, a mall, was losing so much money that a new manager came in, and I was told this exact words: the new manager took a machete to the budget and cut out everything that was extra. I was one of those extra things, and so I lost the client. Nothing to do with me doing a bad job. The client had nothing personal against me. They just stopped ordering balloons for every event once a month, which meant I lost a 40% of my income from the year before. And it looked bad. It looked really bad. So that data point was I lost a lot of money. And yeah, I did, and it really hurt. Big loss of revenue from the year before. However, when I looked at the other part of it, looked at the data from a different point, in 2018, that company had been 80% of my income. 80% of my revenue from one company. The following year, I lost them and only lost 40% of my revenue. The other 10% of my revenue loss was me for not reaching out to a couple of clients in time for some big events, which was my bad. But still, that was only 10% of that total. But when you look at the data, while I lost my biggest client and I took a hit, I had made up 40% of my revenue was no longer from them, which means if I had not lost them, that one giant company, and kept them, I would have ended the year with a 40% increase in gross revenue. So one company really did hurt, but I grew my customer base bigger to have that hit only be 40% of loss instead of 80% of the loss. Therefore, my company was not shrinking, but my company was still growing. My company has never stopped growing until this year. But this little thing called COVID-19 hit and just slammed the event industry really, really hard. But that's another story. That is just life sometimes comes at you and yanks the carpet out from under your feet. So, but I'm still starting to come back. Did 2 events yesterday. Made 2 balloon designs for 2 different small parties. So yeah, it's coming back. I'll be okay. But just to show you, when you look at your data, you need to know that sometimes the data might look bad, but then you have to break it down to the different data points and see what that really means. Now, people do lie with statistics all the time. I do recommend you don't lie with statistics in your marketing, because once people figure it out, they'll come after you for it. Like, all the time you see 99% of dentists suggest using this toothpaste, which could be true. But what they don't tell you is when they ask those dentists, 99% of them say, oh yes, I would suggest you brush your teeth using this toothpaste, and this toothpaste. These are my 3 toothpastes I recommend to anyone. You can use any one of these toothpastes and they're equally good. So the dentist might, 99% of them, recommend 3 or 4 brands that are all equally good. And so you just claim that your brand was the one they said was 99%, and you could be very truthful and still deceptive all at the same time. Now, going to deception on statistics, people will use statistics and they'll hide their methodology, or if you do find how they came up with the numbers, you find their numbers don't say what they say because they twisted the numbers to promote their own narrative. And I have come to find whenever I see someone say it's statistic, that it really is helpful to go dig into and find the original data where they came up with that number. Because that is a big big issue, and I felt it personally in the balloon world. In the balloon world, there's a lot of anti-balloon, well, for lack of a better word, radicals, who really want to ban all balloons off the planet because to hear them speak, balloons are the #1 most deadly thing on the planet for turtles and birds, and they kill so many turtles and birds, and they're horrible, and they're plastic, and they ruin the environment, and if we don't stop using balloons, then everyone's going to die. Well, not quite that extreme, but it's pretty bad. And they're extreme. They do a lot of extreme memes. They say a lot of stuff with the data. They say data shows this and this and this. And it's scary. And if you listen to the data, you might think balloon artists like myself are just evil people for daring to make a living by making balloon art. That is until you start digging into the numbers and finding out that they're at the best misrepresenting the data, at the worst outright lying. For example, somebody did a documentary about how bad balloons were, and they listed some data and some statistics from a study, and they were talking about how bad these things were in the study. And what they didn't mention about the statistics, this is another way to lie with statistics, is lie about which data set it's from. They straight lied because the data they were reading about was plastic bags. I do believe it was plastic grocery bags. A study on plastic grocery bags, and they said it was a study about balloons, latex rubber balloons, and it was not. Totally two different products. Can't compare the two, but yet they did, and they lied about it. Straight lie. Another thing they have done is take the data from a research paper, which was extremely biased from the get-go, which stated that sea turtles purposely eat balloons. They target balloons when they're in the ocean because they look like jellyfish, and so they see the balloon that looks like a jellyfish and goes, num, num, num. And they go and they attack the balloon and eat the balloon more than any other trash because it looks like a jellyfish. So they eat balloons more often than any other trash. They purposely eat, and that causes them so much harm and damage, and it's really, really bad for them. So it's kind of a scary thing, and the data backs it up. Or does it now? Well, let me go look. I, having a vested interest in this data, went and looked at the study, which is extremely biased. When you look at the wording and the way they put things, etc., it's very clearly biased. But I went and looked at the study and looked at the data that they developed. Here's the data they developed. The percentage of total amount of debris ingested by all turtles. So, from this chart, it talks about the total percentage of debris ingested by all turtles. Okay. It says there was 33.11% was hard plastic, 34.25% was soft plastic, 13.06% was plastic rope, string, twine, non-plastic rope was 1.8, packing straps 3.12, fishing items 4.73, balloons 3.2, other rubber 0.9, foam 3.5, and other 2.33. So let's see if you caught that. They said that sea turtles eat balloons more than any other type of balloon debris. They target balloons. They think they look like jellyfish, is the claim. Now, when you look at the numbers of rubber, most of the rubber items are balloons. 3.2% of the items that were eaten were balloons, and only 0.29% were other rubber items. So out of rubber items, yes, sea turtles eat way more balloons than any other rubber items. However, according to this table, 33.11 and 34.25% respectively are plastic. Combined total, it's around 70% of the items are plastic, and only 3.2% are balloons consumed by sea turtles. But when these activists come out, they say, look, sea turtles purposely eat balloons, and we found more balloons in the stomachs of sea turtles than any other item. They leave off the part that balloons only accounted for 3.2% of all items found in the stomachs of sea turtles. And then they, of course, refuse to look into any other reasons why balloons might be the number one thing found in sea turtles, being that there is probably a more likelihood of a balloon making it to the waterways, which is a good point. That I'll give a point that it's more likely for balloons to be found in the ocean because balloons are more likely to be released or lost or dropped by kids, etc. Not a lot of people are going to be dropping a latex glove or a condom into the ocean. That you're not going to find that many latex and other small rubber items in the ocean. It's just more likely to be balloons because of the sheer numbers of balloons that might wind their way into the ocean. So you can't do a comparison because you'd have to have out of 300 latex gloves, 300 condoms, 300 balloons, how many of each of those do the sea turtles eat? Because you can't do a raw comparison. Because if there's 300 balloons and 20 condoms and 20 rubber gloves, then of course they're going to eat more balloons. You can't do a fair comparison. And that's the problem with statistics like this. You can look at some data, but you ignore other parts of the data set, or you only take parts of the data set that confirm your bias and release that data. And very, very few people in the public will bother to go find the research paper, download it, open it up, and read through the whole thing, and then you could usually get away with these lies. Because that's a lie. That's spinning the data and outright lying. And even the paper, it says balloons are the most thing. They worse for sea turtles. They look like jellyfish underwater. Which, yeah, sorta. Clear plastic bags look more like jellyfish than balloons, especially brightly colored ones. I know, I've seen jellyfish. I live right by an ocean. Lots of jellyfish. Balloons don't look like jellyfish in the water. They don't. Even popped when they do look somewhat like jellyfish, which does happen if they explode way up in there. But no, they don't. And no, balloons are not the number one thing sea turtles eat. They don't target them any more than they do plastic items, etc. So it's just playing games with statistics, ignoring other factors, not trying to find other factors, and looking at the statistics through the eyes of a bias. So if you find your company under attack from somewhere and they're using statistics against you, make sure you don't just go, oh, well, I guess you're right, and then just give in. Look into it. Look at the data set. Find this study. Find where they get those numbers. Are those numbers biased? Are they unbiased? Is there, look at the method of the way they gathered it. There's one report about balloon trash, and the way they gathered data was nothing scientific. They just put up the Survey Monkey survey, and how many pieces of trash have you seen? And if you fill out the survey, you get a free t-shirt, and half the applicants never filled it out completely. The data was random. People were not documenting any of these finds. It was just a survey, and they broke down the data from the survey, which was ridiculous. And the stats they came up with could not be validated scientifically in any way, shape, or form. And they came up with statistics about balloons being found on beaches way more than anything else, which was weird because in a lot of other beach cleanup data, balloons are a tiny fraction of a percent, if at all, mentioned in the cleanup data. So obviously, the numbers don't lie, but people can misrepresent, twist, or misunderstand statistics, which is something you need to be very careful about. Now, on a more positive note, when you do understand statistics, when you do understand the data, when you account for other variables, it can be very powerful and a very useful tool to your business. And here's an example, which is Target decided they wanted to, well, aptly target young pregnant women with an ad campaign to sell more baby stuff. Bottles, wipes, nursing bras, nursing pads, all these little things that you need when you're pregnant and are about to have a baby. So they hired a firm to start doing some research and produce statistical data on pregnant women's shopping patterns. And so they built an algorithm based on this data to see that, when a woman's pregnant, she starts buying things like baby bottles, formula, pacifiers, all these different little things that you would buy getting ready for a baby. Small little things here. Maybe they start buying vitamins. I can't remember what it is. I've got 2 kids. I can't think of it, but I think it's folic acid or something that's really good for babies. Some vitamins that you would take when you're pregnant. Different things that you do when you're a woman that's pregnant. The things you buy to help your pregnancy along. And then they took this data and set it up so anyone with the card, the Target card or whatever, if they were pregnant, would start getting coupons for said items. They did this very, very successfully. And maybe a little bit too much so, because of course the ad department is completely different from this general store manager. And me and Jason, who worked in the arcade, know this very well, that oftentimes marketing departments come with great ideas that they never tell anyone else about outside of the executives that make it happen. And this is exactly what happened with Target, which is the managers had no clue about the campaign or the ad or anything else. All they knew was to run their stores. They didn't have anything to do with the ads. And one day, a man came in, called the manager, got the manager, and started yelling at him because his daughter just went off to college. She's a college kid. She's too young to have a baby. She's not pregnant. And why the heck is she getting all these coupons for baby stuff and for pregnancy? There's no way his daughter's pregnant. And what is he doing? And what are they thinking? Why are they sending these ads to his daughter? A few days later, he shows up again and apologizes, saying, "I'm sorry, guys. I had no clue how this happened, but yeah, my daughter is pregnant. I'm sorry." They predicted she was pregnant, even though she hadn't even told her parents yet. So yes, you can use statistics, you can use data, but you have to be very, very, targeted in the way you do it. You got to make sure you understand the data, make sure you analyze it, make sure you have multiple data points, make sure when you look at the data that you look at all the options of what possibly could explain the data, what could explain discrepancies. If you see a large discrepancy between the final numbers and the individual numbers, look into why. The statistics are, they can be a useful tool, or they can blow up your face. They're like explosives, dynamite. You can use it to, dig a tunnel, build a highway, clear area to build a house, but you can also use it improperly and it blows up in your face. So yeah, statistics are an interesting thing, and I've just barely scratched the surface on this one. This is a very deep subject. I mean, there's a reason there are people who do this full-time called statisticians. It can be very, very confusing, and if you don't interpret the data correctly, then you can get yourself in trouble. You can make big mistakes. You have to be careful with them. So, and to wrap up, when it comes to statistics, they're a tool, they're useful, they can be harmful. Make sure you understand everything about them, about the ones at least that apply to you and your business before making any decision based off of them. And also be aware, again, of anyone using them against you to make sure that it's accurate and they're not pushing their own narrative. Anyway, with that, I do hope you have a great day. And again, I do invite you to come and subscribe. Join me on behind my little paywall. I'm going to try to add some excellent content for you. And the first 10 people who sign up will get a free 2-hour consultation with me as well. The first 10 people that sign up, 2-hour free consultation. Talk about whatever you want in business, whether it is you want to go into business, you want to leave your 9-to-5 job, you want to start your own business, you're struggling with moving ahead with growth, anything. 2 hours free, the first 10 people to sign up. So go check it out. That's on buymeacoffee.com/bootstrap. And I'll see you there. You have a great day. Bye-bye. Remember to get your free half-hour consultation by using our contact page and the links below. If you found value in this content, please give us a 5-star rating on whichever podcast platform you use. It is very helpful if you share this with your friends. If you'd like to directly support this podcast, I have a few donation links in the description, or you can check out the show sponsors. You have been listening to the O'Connor Bootstrap podcast, which is an Atheoz Business Solutions podcast. Our companion podcast, the Atheoz Business Podcast, which is hosted by Jason St. Clair. Our past episodes and related blogs, you can check out our website at www.atheoz.com, which is www.atheoz.com or atheoz.com. Remember, you can also check us out on the O'Connor Bootstrap Podcast Facebook group, where you can interact with me and other people who are bootstrappers and entrepreneurs. The link is in the description. Come check us out. I would love to interact with you. And until next time, I'm your friendly neighborhood entrepreneur, Isaiah O'Connor. See you later.